these existing forms of communication, many of which have a history of working with or embedding themselves into English. ProTactile does not limit itself to a set of pre-existing coordinates. It is not a system of gestures or touches. It is not a grid that can be used generally across myriad situations. ProTactile is a linguistic cultural paradigm and an ethos. Quote, ProTactile philosophy is not just about accessing communication. It affects all areas of life, including deafblind culture, politics, empowerment, and language. Based on the strong belief, also prevalent in the deaf community, that separating language and culture is both detrimental and impossible, ProTactile brings into action tendencies of listening and speaking that best address the singularity of deafblind experience. A mode of encounter grown from within the culture, ProTactile is a call for the deafblind community to reject distantism and embrace the incipiency of feeling of a touch that reaches toward experience in the making. While touch has always played an important role in deafblind culture, and much communication already moves through touch, the modality of touch foregrounded through interveners, the mediators thought necessary for deafblind people to make sense of the world, tends toward distantism. Quote, we can see in the record how distantism set in and how hearing and sighted people wanted things to look right. It didn't look good when we went around groping in the dark. It didn't look good for us to cluster together and have too much fun. Education meant we had to sit behind a desk. End quote. That's John Lee Clark. With the intervener, the practice is to create a communicational model that mediates touch. Touch is necessary, it is understood, but only at certain stages of the mediated encounter. Quote, but when we go exploring or when we just exist, sighted and hearing people rush to intervene. Quote, can they help us? Please don't touch. They will be happy to describe it to us. They will guide us. No, they will get it for us. It's much easier that way. Hello, my name is Katie, and I'm your intervener. John Lee Clark. For someone outside the deafblind community who cannot understand sign language, a ProTactile video provides little to no information as content. I cannot understand the details of what is being said. What I can perceive, however, is the force of relation. Bodies are actively listening and composing together. The conversation has a shape, and that shape feels dynamic. A vitality affect is felt in the watching. Communication has clearly taken on an emergent quality, activating the virtual body of sensation in the encounter. Vitality affects, as described by Daniel Stern, are emergent attunements felt in the relation. Stern speaks of an overlap of movement, time, force, space, and intention or directionality as being at the heart of all vitality affects, or what he also calls vitality forms. These 5 elements must not be seen to work in isolation. Together they form a gestalt, and that gestalt has affective tone. Vitality affects are, quote, the felt experience of force in movement with a temporal contour and a sense of aliveness, of going somewhere. They do not belong to any particular content. They are more form than content. They concern the how, the manner, and the style, not the what or the why. End quote. ProTactile is a recognition that deafblind communication carries its own singular vitality affect, and that this needs to be valued. One aspect of this singularity is the emphasis on movement. Without sight and hearing to facilitate connection to the world, deafblind people have to connect more deeply to their kinesthetic and vestibular senses. They do this by doing what we all do. They move. In a description of ProTactile communication in process, Clark emphasizes the role movement plays. In Where I Stand, he writes, as a deafblind person, standing for me is almost never about being still or in one place. Waiting for a bus, I would move without realizing it. My way of standing by moving around gives me more information about where I am. I'm taking in the scene, being present in the world, and prodding things a bit, exploring. And when 2 deafblind people talk to each other while standing, they always move around so that after a while they're standing where the other person was. Later on, they'd be back to their former positions, having circled each other. This phenomenon is the result of each person shifting to the left to listen to the other person tactilely in a more comfortable way, hand following hand at a certain angle. I would always find myself emerging from an engrossing conversation standing in a different place." End quote. Movement gives experience shape. Movement is primary. It is through movement that incipient sensation catches the world's tendencies and moves into them, altering them in the passage. Making movement primary by itself shatters distantism, for distantism requires position. It requires pre-choreographed placeholders that have already been given value, that have already been signaled as worthy of attention. This is why distantism is so central to the template of neurotypicality. It allows the value of experience to be mapped in advance. And this is why neurodiverse experience is so threatening, because it makes felt what would otherwise remain backgrounded and gives it value, thereby revaluing value. New ways of living proliferate, and with them come new ways of knowing. Movement is everywhere in the literature on ProTactile, itself called a movement. For too long, deafblind communication tended to be watered down to the most atrophied of communicational models, third-party interpretation. Not only was this slow, the vitality affect of the communicational swarm was dampened by the stagnancy of the ordered back and forth. Little could be shared in the making. This mode of communication was closer to reporting than conversation. With ProTactile comes a liveliness in communication that allows the vitality affect of the conversation to be felt by all. There is much to learn from ProTactile's engagement with touch as an ethos that troubles distantism. The neurotypical template moves at the pace of distantism, opting for mediation at every turn. Working with a pre-existing matrix, it organizes, categorizes, prioritizes, excludes, justifying forms of knowledge acquisition, modes of self-presentation, moral categories. It shapes the contours of education. It organizes the vocabulary of sensation, of perception, of experience. When Suzy Guimont writes, "The world of deafblindness is far from a dead one. The world is constantly full of vibrations and smells and changes in temperature and air pressure. Many people seem to believe that without ears and eyes, the world becomes unmoving and still, but this couldn't be farther from the truth." End quote. She is speaking about a value system predicated on a neurotypical valuation of sensation. She is underscoring the ways in which the categorizing of experience in advance through neurotypical codes limits our capacity to imagine experience beyond the spatiality of distantism. ProTactile immediates experience. Moving with experience in the making, the intervener as mediator no longer has a predestined role to play. Experience is lived from the edges in. ProTactile is a reaching toward the world that makes felt how the world is already poised to meet the encounter, the relational body of communication alive with the force of the touch that will give it dynamic shape. For what occurs in the encounter of emergent communication can never be reduced to two enclosed, pre-constituted selves, one active, one passive. Nor is the encounter only human. Quote, "Society is not companionship or friendly association with others. It's companionship or friendly association without others, in the absence of the other, in the exhaustion of relational individuality, in consent not to be a single being." End quote. Fred Moten. The consent not to be a single being, Edouard Glissant's resonant words, is a call to a synaesthesia that honors the more than of sense, that includes the force of metatactility and vibrates with worlds verging toward consciousness. Not distantist, but not proximist either. In the field of minor sociality, where relational bodies compose with the force of the incipiency of a touching beyond touch, ProTactile proposes a reaching toward that touches the being of relation. Thank you.